gutsy lady with us. And she's fantastic. And the story she's going to tell is a great example to us how we have to be more courageous. Like, we have to trust in God. You know what our license plate says? It says West Virginia. That says trust Him. It's right out here. Take a look at it before you leave. But she's an example of trust. And that's why she's been able to do the great things that she's been able to do in the state of West Virginia. Please welcome Senator Patricia Rucker.
Thank you all for being here. I'm just going to let the Holy Spirit lead me, because as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of things I have not said before that I want to say in this talk. So I'm going to trust Him. I just want to let you all know that I consider myself a regular person, mother of 5, happily married to my husband for 21 years, and I do not consider myself special. But I am willing to tell my story, especially if it helps any of you in your prayer life and in your attempt to try to do God's will, which is my only goal, trying to do God's will. So I will give you a little bit of my background, because Jack makes me. I was born in Caracas, Venezuela. My parents both are incredible stories in and of themselves. My father was the oldest of 7. His mother actually had 14 children, but only 7 survived. And he grew up in a little fishing village in Carúpano, Venezuela. And he wanted to go to college. And his family, nobody went to college. And so he had to work to be able to fulfill his dream. And the way he did it is he would work whatever jobs he could find. And if I told you the list of things he did, I mean, he was really like amazing, all the things that he attempted. But he raised enough money to go to college for a year, and then he would run out of money. So then he would work for a couple of years, and then save enough to go back and go to college for another year. And once again, have to stop because he didn't have the funds to continue. And it took him 10 years to graduate. And my mother, who was the oldest of 9, my bad grandmother had 11 children, but 9 survived. And she grew up in the barrios of Venezuela, which is shacks that they have outside of the city on the mountain. And they're literally aluminum, just put up. There was basically 2 rooms in this aluminum hut for her siblings and herself. There was no running water. They had to walk down the mountain to where there was a public well, pump out the water and bring it back up. And she was the first in her family to ever go to college. And she loved education. In Venezuela, there were public Catholic schools for everyone. But pretty much it ended in 8th grade. So if you wanted to go on, it's a little more challenging. And the whole entire family, aunts, uncles, everyone got together and helped have enough money for my mother to take the bus to get to a Catholic high school so she could go to high school, graduate, and then go to college. And when she got her first paycheck, real paycheck, she graduated as a journalist, she took that money and put a down payment on an apartment so that her 8 siblings and mother and father could actually move into a home with a door, windows, and running water. And I always love that story, admire my parents very, very much. They met in college. Both of my parents graduated as journalists. My mom continued her education, got a master's, and was actually teaching as a professor in Venezuela when my father was offered the job to come to Washington, D.C. Covered the Washington, D.C. desk of this agency, France Press. And he took the job without even asking my mom. It was his lifelong dream to travel. He had self-taught himself 2 languages in addition to Spanish, and he knew this is what he wanted. And he was totally okay with leaving my brothers and sisters and I and my mother in Venezuela with her family, and he would just come and visit us as often as he could. And my mother said, no, that I want my children to grow up with their father. I don't want to be separated. So even though it killed her, she had to lose her professorship, lose all that she had done, and move away from her family. She did not know English. She made the incredible, courageous decision to come to Washington, D.C. with my father, and that's why we all came. I was 6 years old when that happened, and again, the courage and the motto of my parents absolutely is part and parcel of who I am, I can tell you. Always, my parents, They're just honorable, intelligent people, care about us. And I don't want to give the impression my dad didn't care about us. He just knew that in order to fulfill his dream, this is what he needed to do. And he worked for Agency Friend Press his entire life and is retired, and he and my mother live in Olney. All those years that we were growing up, the idea was we were going to return to Venezuela. Unfortunately, Hugo Chavez got elected by the Venezuelan people and made that impossible. But literally, up to that point, the idea for my parents was when my dad retired, he would return to Venezuela. They never even applied for residency in all the years we were here. And I applied for residency only because I met my husband, who I love very much, and only then did I apply for residency, when I was already an adult. Anyways, just to give you a little bit of that background. My husband and I were living in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is where I grew up. When I had my firstborn, I was teaching for Montgomery County Public Schools, and when they put that baby into my arms, I knew I was not going to be able to put her in daycare. I wanted to be the one to raise her, and I had to tell my husband, I can't do it. I can't leave her. And so he, as a wonderful man that he is, said, okay, we'll make it work. And part of that meant leaving Montgomery County because it's just too expensive on one income. And that's what got us to move to West Virginia, where we have lived since the year 2000. So I became a citizen in 2004. Thank you. The legal way, put in the paperwork, give me time. And I have to say that I never imagined myself actually running for office. But around 2008, 2009, I had only been voting for, basically a few years. I just was so upset with the way things were going. I didn't like some of the things that were happening. It made me feel like we were drifting in the direction of Venezuela. Hugo Chavez was elected in 2000, so he was already well on his way to destroying my homeland. And so I decided to get involved, and the way I got involved, I've always been active with my church and, raising my children. I homeschool all 5 of them, but I decided, I want to have a real choice when I go to vote. And so I looked for people I could recruit to run for office, that I could trust, that I could support, that I could vote for. And I was pretty successful in doing that. And in, of course, encouraging other people to run, I promised them, I'll help you. So I helped get some people elected. I campaigned with them and for them. And some of those you may know, like Congressman Alex Mooney. I was the very first volunteer when he moved to Jefferson County, and helped him, helped our current Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey, helped some local candidates also. So I thought that was my role. So that's the way that I'm going to help. But 2014 election was coming up, and nobody wanted to file to run against this one delegate, and happened representing me in my delegate district, and nobody wanted to run against him. He was well known. His family had always lived in West Virginia. His family had a very big law firm in Charles Town. Everybody knew the name, and he was very wealthy, very well connected, and no one, they just felt like there's no point running against him. There's no way you can win that district. Well, when literally the deadline, the night before the deadline, I get a phone call from my friend Patrick Morrisey, who had, as I mentioned, I helped him get elected as Attorney General of West Virginia. He said, Patricia, why don't you just put your name in there? And I'm like, nope, can't do it. I'm homeschooling my children. That's my job. No, but just give the voters a choice. You don't want to have it just blank. Then we're just letting him have it. Just give them an opportunity. And, we went back and forth. It was a long conversation, but he had an answer for every objection I made. So I spent that night praying and, of course, talking with my husband, and, had to be important that he was in support. And he was. He told me, go for it. No question. A little harder for me because I kind of had an idea what it might be like. But I did. The next day I filed to run against him for the House of Delegates. And it was a pretty audacious thing for a homeschool mom to do. But I just went door to door. I didn't have the money, but I could at least have time. And I did. And the way that I go door to door is I literally would homeschool from 8 to 2 o'clock, then change into my clothes, and I would take one of my kids with me. They all had to take their turns, and I would go door from 3 o'clock until basically it got dark. I would go door to door, and I did Monday through Saturday, of course never on Sunday, and I did that for about half a year for that delegate race. When the election occurred, I lost by 131 votes. So I wanted to be able to face all of my friends and people who, had encouraged me to run. I did everything I could, and I did. I really, truly did give it my all. And so I felt like I did my job. I did what I could. No Republican had ever gotten close to winning in that delegate race. So, it was pretty amazing. So then I'm good. I'm done. But in that election, West Virginia, for the first time in 84 years, the Republicans gained control of the House and the Senate, including some of my friends that I had helped support. So they invited me to come down to see like the changing of the guard when the new session was beginning, and for the first time ever, I was given a tour of the Capitol. And when I walked into the Senate chamber, the West Virginia Senate chamber, I literally walk into the entrance and I hear a voice in my head saying, "You will be sitting here." Wow. I stopped, like, where did that come from? That's strange. Until that moment, I had never once considered running for Senate. And so then I was like, okay, I'm not going to tell anybody, but that was really odd. So I went back home and I just started calling my friends who were delegates and could run for state Senate in 2 years, and I said, are you guys at all interested in maybe running for that Senate seat 2 years from now? No, we're not interested, but we'll support you if you do it. So then I called previous people who had run for that seat, previous candidates, and I said, are you going to be running? Are you thinking of running for, trying to gain that seat? Nope, not interested, but we'll support you if you do it. So I kept hearing that over and over again, and then because it is so hard for me to trust God, I, would pray. And the way that I pray is, I say all the reasons to God why it's a bad idea. And, you really have to show me a sign. It can't possibly be your plan for me to run. And in one of these times that I was in adoration praying, and again, all of the different things of why it's not good, and I really love staying at home and homeschooling my children, once again, that voice spoke to me, and all it said was, do you trust me or not? That's all it said. No other answer to any of my other questions, just, do you trust me or not? And then at that point, all my excuses were worthless. I just knew, yes, I have to say yes. I cannot say anything but yes. Of course I trust you, Lord. So without knowing what would happen or how it would happen, I just trusted him. And I pre-filed to run for that Senate seat. And this was in January of 2015. So a whole year and a half. Nobody else is pre-filing at this point or thinking about that Senate seat. The election is in November of 2016. But I pre-filed. I moved ahead. I got volunteers and everything. And this is how I know that God meant for me to trust him and to do it. When that year's session ended in April of 2015, the senator who had that seat and who had been the senator for that seat for 20 years, he announced his retirement. He was not going to run for re-election. The very next day, the delegate that had beaten me by 131 votes announced he was going to run against me for that Senate seat. So I know why God didn't wait, didn't give me a chance. He wanted me to pre-file. He wanted me to trust in him. And so we were facing a rematch. And I will tell you that I did the same thing as when I ran for delegate. I just went door to door. I'm not wealthy. The only money I put into my campaign was the $200 to apply. That was what I could afford. But I just tried to meet as many people as possible. And I never campaigned against my opponent. I campaigned on why I was running and why we could do, what my vision was for West Virginia, and how I wanted to help. And one of the things that I just got inspired to tell you that I haven't said in any of my other talks was, so those who are more politically savvy and who are involved in politics all the time, they tried to advise me, first of all, you need to attack. You're not going to win. He's well known, he's wealthy, he's got much more money, you've got to attack him. And I absolutely refused. And over again, this same temptation put in my face. But I knew I was running because God asked me to, and God would not want me to do that. That would be getting off of the path. And my only reason for doing this was for God. So I refused. I never attacked my opponent. And the other thing that they kept advising me to do was, don't waste your time on the Democrats. They're never going to vote for you. So they told me, don't bother going into the inner city of Martinsburg, which is the biggest city that I represent. Don't just go to the Republicans and Independents. Don't bother with the Democrats. Well, I refuse to follow that policy, mostly because, again, the prompting of the Holy Spirit. I, first of all, represent everyone. And I know everyone has an opinion and a dream for their life. And I wanted to know what that was. And my purpose in going door to door was to talk to them, be there for them, listen to them. The Holy Spirit prompted me in what I said. Many times when I knocked on somebody's door, it wasn't a campaign speech that would come out of my mouth, but something completely different that I don't even know where it came from. And I know it was the Holy Spirit telling me, And it was funny because the people who went door to door with me, they just never knew where I was going to go because of that. I was just following and trusting God every day. And I should have mentioned this before I started going door to door, I would pray, God, please give me the words for whoever I'm going to meet today, and pray for that person. And I believe that he really did. He really did step in. So it wasn't my words and it wasn't my skills. It was God and his graces. But I campaigned in the inner city of Martinsburg, and I went to Shepherdstown, and I went to all these areas that had a lot of Democrats. And there were people who were rude to me. You never knew what was going to happen when you opened the door. And yes, it makes me nervous. I'm knocking on somebody's door, and they might be really mad that I'm bothering them. But the vast majority of my experience was positive. And many people told me that I was the first person to ever knock on their door. And I wasn't campaigning for their vote. I was bringing, I hope, Christ to them. So there were many times in which I never even asked them to vote for me, but I listened to them. They needed someone to knock on their door. They needed someone to talk to that day. And so I just, when every single day ended, I just trusted that I did what I was supposed to do that day, which was to talk to that person. And that really freed me from a lot of fear about the election, because it's not about winning. My focus was not on winning. My focus was, let me please do what your will is. And if your will was that I meet this person and talk to this person and befriend this person, I've done your will. I'm happy. And that really did happen. I felt like I was making friends. And it was wonderful. So when the campaign had gone on for over a year, I could tell that I was making an impact. Of course, people who support me put signs out on their yards, and you were seeing Rucker signs everywhere. I still remember when my husband, about 4 months before the election, it's like, you might actually win. Like, we better talk about what we're going to do. And I still remember that reaction from him. And it's like, yeah, it's possible. We'll see. But my opponent realized that I might actually win. And so that's when the attacks started to happen. And first of all, he tried to portray himself as me, essentially. And one of the things that he did was he helped create this PAC, and he named it West Virginia Family Values. And it was just really quite humorous that this gentleman had a PAC with that. And surprisingly enough, they endorsed him. I know, that's shocking. So he was able to put out ads on the radio that West Virginia Family Values endorses my opponent. But that was only the beginning. Then he realized he had to start attacking me, I guess. He felt that was necessary. And he started paying canvassers to go door to door and leave things at the door saying that I was going to defund public education. And the only reason he said that was because I was a homeschooler. So of course I don't want kids to have public education. So, and then when that wasn't enough, then they started to say that I wanted to legalize heroin. And so that was really hilarious.
Oh my.
Yes, it was.
The bad gets worse.
It's, again,
Ludicrous.
I really believe because it was so ludicrous, people didn't believe it, and I'm thankful for that, because while I'm campaigning and these attacks are happening, and the ads are, he's putting ads in the Frederick radio station, in the Virginia radio station. I had friends of mine from here calling me saying, Patricia, we're here, we're having ads pop up on our internet and all this, and I was really afraid that people would believe it. I mean, you know, when you're in the midst of it and they're trying to say these horrible things about you, you have no idea. And it made me very scared and very nervous. I was going to lose my friends. I was going to lose my reputation. But what could I do except just be honest and be who I was? And there were a couple of opportunities for us to debate. And, you know, I'm here against the trial lawyer, and I'm a stay-at-home mom. Many years from debating. I did do debate team when I was in high school, but that had been many years before. And I really just had to pray for the Holy Spirit to help me. It was so nerve-wracking. I couldn't eat or sleep the whole day and night before the debates. But somehow I did okay. I had no idea whether I won or not, but I just stayed honest and truthful. One of the greatest things that happened in one of these forums and debates, so there's all the candidates that are up for state offices are all sitting up at the top, and one of the things that they asked us about was about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which in the legislature had died, unfortunately. And they're asking all of our opinions as to this controversial bill. And every single person up there was against it or waffling. Okay, so the other Republicans that were with me at the forum were waffling on it. And I didn't waffle. I said the truth. I said I absolutely would support it. I don't believe that you should give anyone a license to discriminate, including discriminating against people for their faith. And I had people stand up and applaud. And this was at an NAACP forum where it's mostly Democrats. But they were happy to see someone be courageous and standing for their faith. And so that's just one example of where, again, just saying the truth, just sticking to my message. And when the election finally happened, I won by about 5,000 votes.
Wow.
Again, I really know it was God. I should not have won. My opponent outspent me 4-1 and had so much attacks against me, so many advantages that I did not have. But I know that it was God's will. And I just did what he told me to do and followed through. And then after I got elected, which I know I need to get to, Jack.
No, it really gets good.
So I am new legislator, and I really don't know what I'm doing, and I just want to sit in the back seat and just watch and learn. But the West Virginians for Life came to me and they asked me if I would, you know, maybe help with the parental notification law that West Virginia had on the books, but it was meaningless. It allowed, so parental notification law is saying that if you're a minor, you have to notify your parents before you get an abortion. But you could waive that if a physician just waived it. Well, you know, the way things happen, the abortion clinic knows who to send you to, who will sign that waiver under whatever pretense. So really, it was just a meaningless law. So when they presented this to me, we, you know, trying to decide how can we put teeth into it, how can we make it meaningful, and what we ended up deciding is that we're going to make it where they have to go to a circuit judge. And the whole point for that is that a circuit judge is somebody who has to deal with all facets of social services. He has access to DHHR and to behavioral health and to the police and to all the different agencies for help. And if a young lady is in a situation where she cannot speak to her parents honestly and tell them, I'm in this, having this problem, I want to get an abortion. If she can't go to her parents for help, that young lady needs someone who can help her. And so that was the argument that I made for making it go to a circuit judge. And we put in protections for her. We made it free. The state would pay. She requests to see the judge. The judge has to see her within 24 hours. It would be in a closed hearing, and all the documents would be sealed, would not be made available to the public unless she, the young lady, chooses to make it public. So I put in protections for her. It's not like, you know, I don't have sympathy, one of the things that they use the excuse as to why you don't want to make it hard is because, what if it's the situation where the girl is raped by her parent or uncle or somebody else? And they always like to bring that example, and of course incest is a horrible, horrible thing, and what a terrible situation for that girl to be in. So what they want us to do is they want us to allow her to go get an abortion and go right back to that same situation. So when they come to me and they're bringing up this example as a reason to not change the law, I'm like, you want her to continue being raped. No, she needs help. So going to a circuit judge, he can waive, let her get the abortion, but he can get her help. So needless to say, we passed it. It was a battle, but we got it passed. And one of the many lessons I had to learn in this first year was that the assumption I had made that all of those who were labeled Republican would just naturally be on my side, I had to learn that that's not necessarily the truth. I had to work on my fellow Republicans to understand why we needed to change this and to convince them that we needed to have this way. So that was a very important lesson in my first year. Another one of the miracles that occurred, that I just thank God for being in the right place at the right time, I was put in all of the right committees. That's another sign that God was with me. I've been assigned to 8 committees. Now I'm assigned to 9, but I was in 8 in my first year, and that includes health and judiciary. And almost every single bill that has to do with these kind of issues is going to go through health and judiciary. One of the bills that was put before us in West Virginia was a telemedicine bill. It's already, I think, legal in most states that a doctor, you can just talk to them on the phone and they can prescribe you medicine. And it's a way of helping, especially with the rising healthcare costs. Well, they wanted to do that in West Virginia, where they expand the law and make it legal and available. And it came before us in health, and I didn't have any issues with it. Everybody's like, okay, good. It pretty much passed unanimously. Then it went to judiciary, and thankfully I'm in judiciary. And while I'm sitting there in judiciary, it occurs to me, like, I didn't ask whether or not they could prescribe abortion-inducing drugs. What the bill gave you permission is to prescribe any Schedule II drugs. I don't know what that means. So I decided to press my button and ask that question. And the person who came to speak to us on behalf of the bill, I asked them, can you prescribe abortion-inducing drugs with this? And he didn't know. He was completely taken aback. I'm not sure. I said, could you find out? He goes back to whoever he brings. They always bring their lawyers and other people. And I think the Board of Pharmacy was there. And they asked them. And he came back to the podium and said, I don't know. I'm not sure. But I don't think so. And that's not our intention. We're not trying to do that. So I said, well, I hope, since it's not your intention, you don't mind if maybe I propose an amendment to add that language. Okay, yeah, whatever you want to do. So the rest of the senators asked their questions, and then it came time to propose an amendment, and I made the motion to amend the bill to add language excluding abortion-inducing drugs from telemedicine. Okay? There was only one objection. Everybody else voted for it, and it passed. Well, the very next day, we found out that it was absolutely with the goal of prescribing and making abortion more available. And there were articles in the paper lambasting me, and I can't tell you about the wonderful emails and phone calls, for having made this amendment. And the powers that were, basically pushing for that bill actually tried to convince my fellow senators, the Democrats in the Senate, to take that amendment out when it came to the Senate floor. And I'm quite proud of my fellow senators, because they told them, no, we're not going to do that. You were trying to pull a fast one on the citizens and on the committee, and we're not going to do it. And so that amendment, that bill passed with the amendment, the Senate and the House. So that was totally God. That was complete Holy Spirit. I was not with forethought or planning. So I'm just grateful I was at the right place at the right time. And that was my first year. In the second year of office...
And of course it was Planned Parenthood who was behind it.
Yeah.
Wow. And pharmaceutical company, money.
Yes. So in the second year, West Virginians for Life came to me and asked me, could we try to tighten up the language to reduce the number of abortions we're paying through Medicaid? And I told them, what are you talking about? We're paying for abortions? Tax dollars are going towards abortions. And they said, yes. I said, well, no, I don't want to tighten up the language. We need to stop that. That's not acceptable to me. And they said, well, you can't, because the Supreme Court of West Virginia decided in 1993 in the Planned decision that there was a constitutional right to abortions and to the funding of an abortion. And I said, well, I won't tell you what I said. No, I don't agree. And we obviously have to have a constitutional amendment. And they were like, you don't know what you're asking. That's really, really hard, and you're going to really get the opposition really upset. And I said, yeah, and we'll also get the pro-lifers happy and hopefully coming to vote in a midterm election, right? Wouldn't that be great? So it's like, it's going to be a really tough road. I'm like, but it's the right thing to do. So I, that year, proposed a resolution to add language to our West Virginia Constitution, and I had to get it through Senate Judiciary and the Senate floor. And a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 of the Senate and 2/3 of the House to pass. So there is no way to pass it with just one party, at least not with the numbers we have. We have to have bipartisan support. And there are many, many folks who are elected in West Virginia running on saying they're pro-life, even the Democrats. West Virginia is pretty much a pro-life state, or at least it has always said it is, and in the legislature that's reflected. So even, like I said, a lot of Democrats run on being pro-life. Well, this was putting them on the spot, because this was a vote. This was a serious vote, not just a little, it's a serious vote, and it needed their support in order for it to be an amendment. When it was in the, Senate floor,
Our Lord Jesus said, the truth
it's
will
okay.
set you free. What
The
I
truth
wanted
will
to
set you
know
free.
That is good.
Yes.
Father Goring is very good.
Oh, he is good. So the arguments that they tried to use, they wanted to add an amendment to the proposed language to add the exceptions of rape, incest, life or death of the mother into the actual constitutional amendment. And I had to fight that off because, I believe it should be the legislature's authority to decide abortion policy. And once you put it in the Constitution, it's not the legislature's authority anymore. You're taking it out of our hands. And the exceptions for rape, incest, life and death of the mother is in the law. So the bill that was passed would become law, and that bill exempts them. And if we ever want to change it, you have to go through the same process as you do for changing any law, which means the House and the Senate have to pass it and the governor has to sign it. So I wasn't going to accept it being put into the amendment. Well, I got the amendment through the Senate Judiciary, and then we got it through the Senate, but that was quite a fight. And I'm not going to go into all of those details, but I will tell you that definitely took a lot of prayer, and it took a little bit of coercion to make certain that the people who are pro-life, do the right thing and vote pro-life. And it passed by, more than like 2/3 and one extra vote in the Senate. Then it went over to the House. They had to have all the same battles again, and it passed the House. So at that moment, it becomes a amendment to our Constitution, and it was labeled Amendment 1 in our ballot. So this whole entire year since the session ended, we've been trying to educate folks and tell them what the amendment actually does, while the opposition lies and says what pretends that the amendment is going to do more. If they were saying that it's going to outlaw abortion in West Virginia, which we don't have the authority to do thanks to Roe versus Wade. It was saying that it was going to put women in danger, that even women whose life were in danger, the doctors wouldn't perform the abortion because it's illegal. And again, if you don't know the history, that didn't happen even before Roe versus Wade. Okay, the doctor's first priority is to save the patient, and the patient he has is the mother. So they're never going to just choose to not do anything if the abortion is somehow. And I've learned a lot of those type of details talking to, nurses. My husband is a nurse too, by the way. the situations that they bring up, which are extremely rare, it's always like going to be their priority to save the mother. It's not like a choice that they make to, So, so the issues were very convoluted, very confusing. And when the election actually occurred, the vote was very close. So on election night, it was up, it was down, it was up, it was down. I can't even tell you how nerve-wracking it was, but when all the votes were counted, it won by about 5,000 votes. Wow. So thank you, God. And so as of now, the West Virginia Constitution reads, nothing in this Constitution secures or protects the right to an abortion or the funding of an abortion. So that has been added to the West Virginia Constitution.
Say that again?
Sure. Nothing in this Constitution secures or protects the right to an abortion or the funding of an abortion. So that's now part of our Constitution in West Virginia, and I'm very grateful for the small role I was able to play. I have to say that if I do nothing else, this is one of the differences. I really truly am here just for God's will and whatever His will is. And I never thought I would be a state senator. I never thought that I would have any kind of influence. And even now, every single time that I'm there fighting for a bill, fighting against the bill, it's always, scary. It's scary. You're going to make enemies with every single vote that you make. But the point is, if you're doing this, for the right reasons, and for me, it is to do God's will, I know that ultimately that's what I'm responsible for. So I'm going to make mistakes, right? I'm going to miss some things. But overall, like God knows my intentions are good, and I'm not trying to deviate off the path. And I believe by being that example to others that I'm helping others to also walk the right path and be on the right thing. And just so you all know, I even though Amendment 1 passed, in my home county of Jefferson County, it failed. And because it failed, there's a lot of people saying that, it's going to be very difficult for me to win re-election. And my response to them was I pre-filed to run again as of last Friday. So I will be running in 2 years. Okay, so can we...
Let's take a few questions for the senator.
Yes.
Could you possibly bring up the point that a baby is human from the moment of fertilization and get that in?
Well, I actually did submit a bill saying life begins at conception, and of course it didn't go anywhere. And I say, of course, I shouldn't say that. It's going to be a very tough fight. It would be a very tough fight, but it's absolutely yeah, exactly. Again, I wish that the other side was consistent, because they always want to push for things when it's in their, to their advantage to push for it, but not when it's not. So the same folks who want us to provide money and support for the poor and the suffering, the disadvantaged, but they want to ignore who is the most poor and the most disadvantaged, and that is the unborn. And the same folks who are saying that they're battling for the poor, and that we Republicans don't like the poor or don't care about the poor, and those same folks, they want us to encourage the poor to kill their babies. They're trying to, if they could, they some of them have said they want to sterilize people who are on welfare. And one of the whole reasons why Jack insists that I tell a little bit of my story of my mother and my father. I mean, my family was poor in Venezuela. Okay, like I said, my parents were the exception to the rule, that they actually went to college and had white-collar type jobs. But my family was happy. My family was happy. My family was very Catholic, and we love each other, and we took care of each other. And as I told you, they unite together to help my mother fulfill her dream. My dad had to kind of work it out on his own, but he and my mother have always helped the family, in response with what God has given us. And being poor does not make you unhappy if you don't let it. And the family in Venezuela, which grew up in that 2-room apartment that my mom got them, they never complained. They had to share one bathroom, 2 rooms for 10 people. And whenever we went to visit Venezuela, every other year we would go back to Venezuela for essentially a month and a half during the summer, and we would stay in that 2-room apartment that my mom helped them to get. And they would all move out into the 1 room. We would get the 2nd room, and my grandparents would sleep on the sofa. That's there in the living room. That's how, and they were happy when we came and stayed with them for a month and a half. I mean, there's just a different way of living and different priorities, which really in our culture we have lost, and it's sad.
Oh, really? Can I ask you,
Yes.
what is the breakdown on that the Senate and the House by party?
So right now or before this
Well,
election?
before.
This election, the Republicans in the Senate, there were 22 Republicans and 12 Democrats. And in the West Virginia House, there was 64 Republicans and whatever Democrats to make 100, whatever. But anyway, so there were
36.
Okay, thank you. So that's what it was before this election. After this election, the Republicans have lost their lead a little bit. In the Senate, we have, I think, 20 now instead of 22, and the House has 59. It's 59
Do you run
Republicans.
every 2 years or 4?
So mine is a 4-year term, so I'm midway through my
Midway,
first
right.
term. And like I said, I've filed to run
Right.
again. So, I'm giving them the opportunity. They really want to vote me out of office, so,
You're a natural.
well,
Little arm twisting.
little, yes.
Yeah, I just want to tell a quick story. I'm one of Jack's speakers, and Patricia had recruited me to speak at her parish about, I don't know, a few months into this whole thing, and she told me, being a homeschooling dad myself, she told me she was running for office, and I kind of grew up in politics, ran for Congress in 1990 and all that, and I left there thinking, she's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have a snowball's chance, and you know what, of getting elected. And then I found out 3-4 years later, she's a state senator, so that just goes to show how much I knew. But her tenacity, and I just didn't see the trust in God that she had. And she's just a tremendous example of what we all can do when we get involved and take, I think in this last election, just in the general, it's the people who talk about pro-life, and we lost a lot of Catholics and a lot of minorities, but when you bring up the pro-life and the whole LGBT thing, that's how I think we're going to win people back. And she's a perfect example of what we need to do to actually win. So.
You're phenomenal.
I'm sorry, what?
You are phenomenal.
Oh,
Is there a way people here can support you in West Virginia?
absolutely.
Right.
Yes, there's no prohibition on any of you donating to my campaign or even coming and campaigning for me, with me, helping out. That happens all the time, and it's actually the other side that does that. So you looked at my opponent who outspent me 4-1. Almost all of his money came from out of the state. And who did he hire to do his door knocking? People from Maryland. Again, we usually just don't do those things on our side, but we really need to learn. And when it comes to these issues, I know that this past election, it was a painful lesson for us. The Attorney General that I told you is my friend, Patrick Morrissey, he was running for U.S. Senate against Joe Manchin. And Joe Manchin has shown to us that he's not the pro-life senator that he had said he was. And I voted for Joe Manchin when he ran as governor. Because he said he was pro-life, he had the Westerners for Life pro-life endorsement, and as far as I know, he was pro-life when he was governor of West Virginia, but Patrick lost, and one of the reasons he lost is because he didn't have enough help. He didn't have enough. The polls in August had said he was down by 8, and at that point, all national support ended. He got no funding, he got no support, he got no volunteers, and he ended up losing by about 4%. That's equivalent to about 5,000 votes. So if folks had come in to help, and I was trying to recruit people from, the college students from right over the border in Virginia. There's a great school called Patrick Henry, and very good conservative school, and I was trying to come over and help us. You can actually make a pro-life difference in the U.S. Senate so that we, the next Supreme Court justice that gets nominated by Trump, we have a sure victory. And I could not get people to step in and to care. And one of the things that I'm doing these talks for is because it disappoints me how many Christians and Catholics are not involved in politics. I know politics is ugly. I know it. And I know that we all have things that we're volunteering for and that we're trying to do, and we're living our lives. And that was me when I was, focusing on my children and everything else. But whether we care or not, politics interferes in our lives. Politics is taking our money and paying for abortions, paying for transgender surgery. I mean, things that were like, why
That's
are our
crazy.
elected representatives doing this? That's not what we elected them to do. That's not the role of the government. And when we don't speak up, though, that's what happens. And there's not an election that Catholics by themselves could not win. There isn't. It doesn't matter where you go in the country, because if we were united and we were to vote together as a bloc, like on an issue like pro-life, we just vote for pro-life candidates, we would win every single time. There's enough of us, but most don't. And I'm not saying that to depress any of you. I mean, I can't tell you how many people in my own church, where I live in Charles Town, St. James, who I helped register to vote so they could vote for me. And these are 64-year-olds, God bless them. And I'm registering them to vote for the first time in their lives. And that just breaks my heart. I'm grateful they did it, but it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. And we care about life, we care about these issues, we care about our religious faith. If you don't vote and if you don't get involved, you are letting the other side win. Yes.
One last thing, you mentioned eugenics, but I also think the point about your experience in Venezuela and the contrast and why you are so motivated as a result of that is a good message for us as Americans that are underexposed and kind of naive and don't appreciate global geopolitical things genuinely.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, and it is true. That is definitely part of what
It's
made
a
me
good message for you.
involved in Catholic.
We could end up like that.